In this video, you will learn how to create this web app. It's a typical web app that gets some input data from the user. For example, this one here is a volume calculator. Let's say the user will enter the dimensions of a cube, like 4, 5.7, 3, and they can press calculate and they'll get the results here. So I'm including this web app in this course because this is a very modern way to distribute, to publish your programs, and you can just give the URL to people and they can use your program. So let's build this app in this video. For this, we're going to use the Flask library. So go to packages and install Flask if you haven't done so already. Then you want to go to the directory and create a directory tree, which is basically just a templates folder. So you should create an empty directory, name that templates, and then you should have a main.py file or whatever name you want to give to your Python file. And then inside templates, you want to click there and add a file and name it index.html. It has to be an HTML file. So what we're having here is an HTML file and a Python file. The HTML is responsible to render all these visual elements, so the text, these text boxes, input boxes, the button, all these are built using HTML language. And Python is responsible to do the processing of the data. So in this case, we're going to get these 3 numbers from the user, and then we're going to implement a formula in Python to calculate the volume, which is basically that times that times that. And then we get a final number, and then we send that to this place here in HTML. Now, if you right click here and go to inspect element, you can see the HTML of this page. Of course, you cannot do this because you don't have the URL perhaps, but you can see on my screen here. So basically this 68.4 corresponds with this element. So it's a P HTML element. And then we have things like input boxes. So this here, it's an input element. So it's designed to receive input from the user. A P element is designed to display some text to the user. And then we have other things like H1. This is designed to display big text, so this H1 tag here. So that's the HTML part, basically, that we're going to write here inside index.html. So you might want to start either with the HTML code, or you can start writing the Python code. I prefer to work on the front end first, so on the HTML part. So what I'm going to do is I'm going to write the HTML document here. So you start with div elements. These are the outer elements. A div is basically a division, a section on the HTML website, which could contain other elements. So we have a div, for example, and then we could have an H1 tag. And you should work like this. So you open that tag here, you close it with this backslash, as you see on my screen. The same goes with other tags. You open it there, you write the content in here, so volume calculator, and then you close the tag there. And then perhaps you want smaller text. For that, for smaller text, you need p tags. So open a p tag, close it here, and then in between the tags you write something like enter the 3 dimensions to get the volume. Right? So far, this is the end product, just for you to see as a reference. So far we built that, we wrote that part. Now we have to have some sort of form HTML elements. For that, we need the form element. So open it and close it, and in between now, form will contain different input elements. And it's good to have those input elements inside div tags. So inside this, we have the first input element, like that. And we're going to have 3 of those. So 1 there, 2, and 3. Let me fix the alignment. So you see the hierarchy of the elements. It means this h1 tag is part of that div tag. This is also part of that div tag. Form is part of the div tag as well. And then we have this other div tag, which is part of the form. It's nested inside the form. So all these div tags are inside that form. And then after the input boxes, we should have a p tag to display the output. So let's create a p tag, p, like that. Let's leave it empty for now, because we're going to inject the output dynamically with Python inside these p tags. This is just a static HTML string or text, but this will be dynamic. And then lastly, we have the button element, which is going to have a label, calculate. And that's it. So that's the basic HTML. We have to improve it further, but for now that's enough. Now let's create the backbone of our web app, which is done via Python. And the Flask web framework comes in handy. So we have different frameworks to use with Python. We also have Django and Flask, probably the most used ones. Django is best for bigger web applications which have a big database and many pages, and Flask is best for smaller web apps like this one. So from Flask we want to import the Flask class and then create an instance, a web app instance using that Flask. This class gets as input a string, but it is a good practice to put as input a special __name __ variable. This is a special variable that contains a string, and this string is the name of the current module. This could be needed later on and we'll cover that. But for now, let's just ignore this __name __. Let's just put it here and carry on with the other code. Then we have to think of where the user, the URLs that the user may be visiting. So the first one we have to think about is the home page. So when they visit the home page, that is represented via this backslash. If they visited example.com/about, that would be /about. And then you write a function such as define home, and then in this function you basically return that index.html document. So that means if the user visits your domain, which could be example.com/about, you will return that HTML to the user so that they see it on the web browser. That's how Flask works. If you remove that, that means if they go to example.com, again they will see what we return here, which is, as I said, the index.html. But you don't just do that, but you use a render template function, which you have to import in here. So render template, import it and use it in here, and provide as a string the path to the HTML document that you want to serve. Oh, let me remove the double return. So this should be index.html and not template/index.html, because Flask is designed to look inside a templates folder for these HTML documents. So it's important that your folder is named exactly templates like this, not templates with a capital T. So it should be this lowercase letters template. And to make this app work now, we need one more line. and that is calling the run method of this Flask app instance. So the Flask class creates an instance, and this instance has this method which will run the actual application. Now, if you are on a local computer such as Windows, Mac, or Linux, you can just leave this like this. But if you are using REPL, you need to change the host to a string, which is 0.0.0.0. So you don't have to add this if you are on a local computer. But REPL is a bit special, so it has to serve the application in this host. IP address. Now I can run this, and immediately we can see the web app. So we can see it here in this split screen, or you can just copy that URL. So now that is a public URL. You can just paste it in your browser and you can see your web app. However, nothing will happen at this point. So if I enter some values like that and press on calculate, we're not going to see anything because we haven't given any instructions to the calculate button what to do when that button is pressed. So the page does reload, but we don't see anything. So let's do something about this. But first you need to understand GET requests and POST requests. So both are HTTP requests. An HTTP request is this. If you load a URL, you are making an HTTP request to a server. And a GET request is when you are just getting data from the server. You are not sending any user information. So if you load this page, if you just want to see the empty boxes, if you just load it as I just did, that is a GET request. But if you enter some data in some boxes or some other widgets such as checkboxes and so on, you are sending data to a server. That is a POST request. And the POST request occurs when you press this button. So if you press on calculate, you are sending those data. However, we have not yet implemented a POST request. All we have is a GET request. This one in here. So what we need to do is we need to copy that and paste it one more time. And here, as a second argument, we say methods equals to a list, and the list has one item. It has this post string. So now this URL, so the home page, can handle both GET requests and POST requests. Now let's do something here. Let's print here just a GET request string just to see what we get in the command line. And here GET POST request. So we want to see when one function is being executed and when is the other. So with that, I stop the script and I run again the web app. So when you want to make a change, you want to do that. Now we get this error here, assertion error, which says that the view function is overwriting an existing endpoint function home. So we do have two functions. We have to rename one to something like home post, right? And then run again. And we get the web page, and I'll just use it from this window. You can also use it from here. It doesn't matter, it's the same thing, but this is more practical. So enter something, some values, press on calculate, and we still get the GET request string in here. So this function is executing when we press that button, you see. And that is because we need to add something else in the index.html file. We also have to make the form able to handle POST requests by adding form method is equal to the string post. So inside the form tags, you see this bracket opens here and it closes in here. Stop, run, press on calculate. This time we do get the string get post request. So why do we need to distinguish between GET requests and POST requests? Well, we need to do that because when the user just loads the page as it is, we just want to show these. And when the user presses that button, then we want to get this data from the user and calculate them and then return them to the user. So we do all that inside this second function here. So let's get the data from the user, these data here. How do we do that? Well, you know that in index.html we do have these input elements which generate these boxes. Now we need to give names to these input boxes. So inside this tag, you say name is equal to, let's call this first dim, so first dimension. And do the same for the other ones, name equal to second dim, and the third one, name equals to third dim. So 2 input boxes with names. Now we can refer to these boxes from the Python function to get those input values and then process them. But first we need to import request from Flask. So just add it there, and then let's create some variables. So dim1 request dot form, and we get the first dim. Because you know form now is a list, and I can comment that out and just print request dot form here. So stop, run, just to show you what we get. So if you enter 6, 6, 7, calculate, and we get this immutable multidict, which resembles a list. So it has these tuples, and each tuple has the name of the input and the value that the user entered. So now, out of that list, we need to extract first dim, second dim, and dim3, third dim. So now we have each value that the user enters stored in each of these variables. Then we can calculate the volume, as volume is equal to, be aware that these are strings, so we need to convert each of them to a float. dim1 times float, dim2 times float, dim3. Now we could print out the volume in here, just print volume, but that will show the volume in the command line. The command line is just seen by us programmers. So we want to show the output to the user, to the web app. We do that by using Jinja variables. So remember that we said we're going to put the output in these p tags, which are underneath these text boxes, between the last text box and the calculate button. So in there, we could use this special syntax with double curly brackets. And inside here, you put a variable output, for example. This is just a variable that should also reflect a variable in here. So now in render template, in the home post function, we send as output, so that variable output will be replaced with the value of volume, right? So we inject the volume in the output variable. Stop, run, 3, 4, 5, calculate, 60 is the output. So it's working. However, it is not user-friendly at the moment because the input values disappeared. To fix that, you also want to send back to that page some other variables. So let's say dim_1 is equal to dim1. So that one goes in here. And dim_1 should also be a variable in this template. Through the value property of input tags. So value equal to, you can also put a constant here. So the value, let's say example, and stop and run. So example will now be a default value of this input box. But if you put not a string there, but a Jinja2 variable, so these are called Jinja2 variables. In the Flask template engine, Jinja2 is what makes possible to do this syntax. So there we do the same dim underscore 1. So don't confuse this variable with that. That is the argument name that we sent to the HTML file, so that should be the argument name. The value is dim1, that one. So now, if I stop this and I run it again, we get this first dim. Oh, because I forgot to put quotes around this, like that. So single quote there, or double quotes if you want. So run again. Yeah, now we don't see the value, but if I put 4, 5, 6, calculate. Now the 4 is there because the function will send that dim1 value. So we first get it from the user. When the user first enters that, we store it in this variable and we hold it and we send it back to the form. So there we go. So let's do the same for the other variables. Dim underscore 2 equals dim2, and finally dim underscore 3 is equal to dim3. Let's do this here as well. So I'm just copying that, paste it in the other input elements and change that from 1 to 2, and here as well change that from 1 to 3. Stop, run again. 1, 2, 4, calculate. And this time we do see the values, so the input values and also the output. Lastly, let's improve the layout of our website, because currently we don't have what is called as CSS. CSS is another language that you apply to your HTML code to make it look more modern and more user-friendly. Now, we don't have to write any CSS because we have libraries, CSS libraries, such as Bootstrap, which is very easy to use. So all you have to do is just search on Google for Bootstrap, and the getbootstrap.com website is the official Bootstrap website. So if you go to down here to JS Deliver, and if you copy that CSS only, I'm just using this copy button, copy that, go back to your HTML file and just paste it in here. Stop, run. And we're going to see already that this looks a bit better. But the way Bootstrap works now is that you want to give these HTML elements Bootstrap classes. For example, if you want to make the outer division, so the entire page, a bit different, you want to apply the class container. So that is a Bootstrap class. If I stop this now and I run it again, you see now that the page is a bit shifted on the right. So there is some margin here between the left border of the browser and where the content starts. Then, if you want to make this button to give it a color, for example, you want to go to the button tag again. So just like we went inside the div tag, so you see the opening bracket, the closing bracket, we go again to the first button tag here, and we say a space class is equal to open and close quotes btn. You say that this is a button, and you say that this button has a warning color which will make it yellow. So stop, run, and this is how the button looks like now. Lastly, let's put some placeholders to these boxes because they don't have labels. So what you can do is you go to the input tag and say placeholder is equal to first dimension. Let's do the same for the other one. stop and run. Now we see that they do have some sort of labels, placeholders inside. And the app will still work. Calculate, we get the output here. Yes. So now your app is distributable. You can just get this URL and copy it and give it to anyone, and they will use your program in a nice interface. So you don't have to give them command line programs which they have to install and so on. So thank you for following this, and I'll talk to you later. Hi, a warm welcome. I'm excited now to show you how to build desktop applications which have a graphical user interface. This is one of the most attractive areas because you get to build tangible programs which real users can use. So what you're looking at on my screen now is the first app that we will build throughout this series of videos. This is a currency converter app. It's quite minimal, but it does function very well. So we have two drop-down lists in here. You can choose between these three currencies, so the source currency and the target currency. Currently, there are only three currencies here, but you can easily add more and more. It just takes adding items to a Python list, and that's it. Then we have this input box here where the user can enter the value they want to convert. So in this case, they would want to convert 14 euros to US dollars. And this program will use the current rate, the current real-time rate. And if you press convert, it will show you that 14 euros is equal to 15 point something USD. The program gets the current rate from the xrate.com website using web scraping via Beautiful Soup. I will show you how everything is done throughout these videos. However, in this particular video, we will not work on the currency converter yet. I'll show you first how to use PyQt to make a more simple program, which is this one in here. So this is what we'll build in this video, because I don't want to go directly to the currency converter because it's a bit more advanced than this. This is a very simple one that will help you understand PyQt. PyQt is the library that is used to build this kind of desktop programs with graphical user interfaces. So what this is just a sentence maker. That's how I called it. You just write a sentence here, hi there, and you press on make, and it capitalizes the first letter, and then it puts a dot at the end of the sentence. So this is very simple. It's a standard input button output program. So you get to have to enter some inputs, and you press the button. The button will trigger an action. It will process that string and it will display it in this area here. So let's make this program in this video. You need to use your local IDE for this. A cloud-based IDE such as REPL will not work because you need to have access to your computer graphical user interface, to your operating system, which actually is the one that generates that graphical user interface. So on PyCharm, I have created an empty project directory, and I'm going to create an empty file, Python file as well. Sentence maker, I'm going to name this .py. And then the first thing I'll do is I'll open the terminal and do pip install PyQt6. That's the current version of PyQt, so version 6. There have been different generations of PyQt, so 6 is the current generation. Once I have installed the library, I'm going to minimize the terminal and start coding. So from PyQt, I am going to access key2widgets, which is a base class, and it has a series of classes which we need to import. Q application, Q widget QV box layout, and there are some more. So I'm going to again say from pqt.qt widgets import. You could also go ahead and add them here, but the line is getting too long, so it's a good practice to create a new line, so to have this sort of one column code style. So again, we need Q label and Q push button. I'll explain you what each of these are. We're actually going to use them. So it all starts by creating an app instance, which is equal to Q application. So that is the first class that we imported. This creates the application instance. But then you need another class, which is QWidget. This will be the actual window where you'll add all those widgets, the buttons, the text boxes, the labels, all the elements of your application. Both of these have to be instantiated, and this first one needs an argument, which could be an empty list. You could also enter here system arguments, which is a way to give arguments, special arguments to the application, which the application can use, but this is not the case. We don't need them here. That is a special scenario, so an empty list means no arguments. And then we initialize QWidget as well. And then you can access that variable and set a window title using that method. So let's say sentence maker. That will be the title of the window. Just as you see, my PyCharm has this title here. So that's the window of PyCharm. PyCharm is the application, so to say. The widget is the window, and the title is this one in here. Now let's see how this will look so far without adding any further elements. To be able to see these, we want to specifically say window.show. We need to use the show method, otherwise we will not see anything. And then we need to start the application using app.exec. So that app is this one in here. Yep, a right click and run this program. And that's it. Sentence maker is the title of the app. And you see these default buttons here, which can close and minimize and maximize this window. Depending on your operating system, this window can look different from mine, so keep that in mind. And yep, let's start adding elements now. Widgets. So all the buttons, the text boxes, the labels are called widgets. And we add those widgets, actually, we add them on a layout object. So I'm going to make some space here, and the layout object can be created by this here. So I'm going to create a variable layout, which is equal to QV box layout. So we instantiate that. And the way this works now is that if you now create a new widget, for example, a text box, let's say text is equal to Q line edit, that class, instantiate that. And then you say layout dot add widget, and you add that text widget, that variable which represents the input text box, and you add it to the layout. And then if you execute this, we're not going to see anything because the layout object is loose. It's not connected to the window object yet. So you need to connect the layout to the window object. Let's do it in here. Window set layout. This variable goes here. Now if I execute this again, we're gonna see a different view. So that's the text box we created with QLine edit. And so the idea of the layout is that we used a QV layout, which means V stands for vertical. And that means if I add another input box there, and I run this, you're gonna see that the input, the second input box is added under the first one because this is a vertical layout. So the widgets are added vertically. If you want, you could use a key H box layout here and then use it here as well and then run, and you're gonna see that the widgets are stacked horizontally this time. For our application, we want to add widgets vertically, so I'm going to undo the changes and keep QV box layout. So run again to see. Yeah, that's it. Now, let me delete that QLine edit widget and add here the next widget, which is going to be a button. So let's say the btn variable is equal to qPushButton. Give it a name, so the label that will show on top of the button. And then use layout.addWidget btn. We add that button to the layout widget, and then we add the layout to the window. And run it to see. Yeah, it's working well, but it doesn't do anything. So let's connect that button to some action. And here I would like to stop and explain you how PyQt works. So PyQt is made of widgets, signals, and slots. Let me explain you what that means. So we have the button widget, then we have this clicked signal, and then we have this method, and then we have a slot here. Make sentence. So that's a widget, that's the signal of the widget. So widgets have signals, which could be clicked or checked, etc. So if it's a button, then it might have a clicked signal, which means when the button is clicked, this slot will be triggered. What is a slot? A slot is a function that we need to create now. You can create these functions just under the import statements. So define make sentence. You can name this whatever you like, of course, but it has to reflect that name. And then here, what you want this function to do is, well, these functions actually will serve as procedures. They will not return anything. Their role is to just modify the widgets of the app. For example, in this case, what we want to have here is we want to extract the input text of the user, the text that the user enters in the input box, which is equal to text. Text is this variable, so which contains the QLine edit widget, and then we access the text method of that widget. That widget has a text method, so we get that and we store it in input text. And then what we can do with this input text now could be different things. We could write it in a label widget. So let's create a label widget. We have the button here, we connect the button to the slot, and then down here we have an output label widget, which is equal to q label, which we import in here. This needs to have an empty string as input. If you wanted to show something else, you could write it there, but we don't want to show anything initially when we display the application, the interface. So leave it empty and then add it to layout.addWidget output label. And then we access that output label from this make sentence function. And then from the slot here, we access output label, that widget, and we set its text using the set text method to input text dot capitalize, and we run. Hi there, make. You see H now is capitalized, so it's working. And of course, if you want to add a dot, you can just say plus dot, run it. Hi there, make, and you have that dot at the end of the sentence. So that's our tiny app which works, and I wanted to keep this simple so you understand how PyQt application works. So again, we have widgets, we have signals, and then we have slots, which don't return anything. Actually, they are just used to access the widgets and extract information from them, as we did in here, and then put that information to some other widgets as it is here. And you could also process things in these functions, in these slots. So for example, we did some capitalization of the text in here, we added a dot. So you could also do that in here, that capitalization, store it in a variable, and then provide the variable in here. Or you could also have another function which does the processing, and then you get that output of that normal function in here. But the slot itself should serve the purpose of interacting with the widgets. So with this knowledge, now we're ready to go ahead and create that currency converter app. Let's do that in the next video. See you. Hi, welcome back. In this video, we will build a desktop app which converts between different currencies. And it gets the currency from a real-time website, and it uses that current currency rate to do the conversion between different currencies. So to be able to understand this video, you should have taken the previous video where we built a sentence maker app, a very simple app, which looked like this. So you enter some text and it makes a sentence out of that. So now let's make the currency converter. I'm going to actually duplicate this file, copy it and paste it in the same directory, give it another name, currency converter, because now I'm just going to add more code to this because the two apps are very similar. So I'm going to change the title to currency converter. For this video, all we're gonna have is this input box here and then the button, and then we get the output in here. So we're gonna enter something like 10 and we're gonna get the currency converted into euros. So for this app, we're gonna focus only from USD to euros. Then in the next video, I'll show you how to add drop-down lists here so that you can let the user convert between any currencies. For now, let's take things step by step as usual. So let's have a text box here, a button and the label. That's the window, that's the layout, that's the text box in here, and the button, let's say convert. And we add it to the layout, and then when the button is clicked, we're gonna call a function, also known as a slot in PyQt. So this function currently is make sentence. So I'm gonna replace this with show currency and then provide it here as well, show currency. No need to call it, just mention it inside the connect method. So show currency, and then we get the input text, text.text, text points to this input box, and then we extract the actual value that the user enters. Let's say it is 10. So input text will be equal to 10. Then what should we do to that value? Well, the input text is gonna be multiplied by the current exchange rate. And we're gonna get the exchange rate from a function which we built previously in the course using Beautiful Soup. So if you didn't take that video, is at the end, near the end of browser automation and web scraping section. So this was the code, that's the function that we need. Also we need the imports here, so I'm going to copy that and paste it on top in here. So we import Beautiful Soup. In this line we import requests, and then this function gets an in currency and out currency value as arguments, and then it constructs this URL. So the URL is the URL that points to the X-Rates website, which gives us current currencies. So for example, if I get this URL and I go to the browser, I enter it here and replace this part with from USD and to euro, and I enter, and it takes me to this page. So that's the current rate as I'm speaking. It changes every a minute or so. So Python then is gonna get the source code of that URL of that page, and then it's going to be extracting that element of the HTML of that page where that value is, where that rate is, this one in here. So we did that, we built that already, and then we clean that value because it has this euro string, so we clean that out, we remove that euro, and we end up with a float, which is going to be this number only. So this function, what this does is it returns the float, the rate, the currency rate between any two exchange rates. So since we said that for this video we're going to work only on exchanging from USD to euro, I'm just going to give them some default values for now. In the next video we're going to have this completely dynamic. So for now we have from USD to euros. And so back to our show currency function now. This function is responsible to interact with our widgets, and this function is another thing. See, so this calculates stuff, it processes external calculations. It does in this case, it does web scraping. This is not related to our graphical user interface, so we simply call this function in here now. So let's say the rate is equal to get currency, and that's it. And then input text times the rate. So let's say the user entered 10, we multiply that by the rate, which is this one, for example. And then we get the output. So let's call this the output is equal to that. And then in the output label, we provide the output value, this one in here. Yeah, so let's try this. First I need to install this Beautiful Soup, which you can install by using pip install Beautiful Soup 4. Beautiful Soup 4. I have a typo. I'm missing an I. Beautiful Soup 4. The package is installed, and then we also need pip install requests. Right, once you install those, you're ready to run this code. So enter 10, press convert, and the window disappears. And when that happens, it means you have an error. So look at your terminal, and you see here I have an error in this line, line 20. 20 is here. Output, it says that it cannot multiply sequence by non-int. That is because input text is a string. So when the user enters 10 in here, Python will read it as a string. So what you want to do is you want to convert it into a float. And then you can use it to do multiplication and other math operations. So run again, enter 10 here, convert. Another error. Let's see this time, it's in line 21. So output label set text output. This time it says that self text, as you see here, it accepts a string as argument. But argument was float. So we have the float here, which is a product of that times that. So for this to work with set text, you need to convert it into a string. So run again, try 10, convert, and that's the output. So 10 euros is equal to $8.8. And of course you can round this up using a round function and have, for example, 2 numbers after the decimal point. Run 20 converts, and now it looks better. 6 after the decimal points. And that's our script for now. So we built what we planned to build, and that was making an app which converts between euros and dollars. Now, to make this even more advanced and let the user select what currency they want to convert from and to, we need to use drop-down list widgets. So we're going to do that in the next video. We're going to add 2 drop-down lists widgets before these other widgets. So see you in the next video. Hi, welcome back. In this video, we will make our app more advanced by adding 2 drop-down lists here on top of these other widgets somewhere in here. The first drop-down list will contain the input currency, and the second drop-down list will contain the target currency. So the user can choose between currencies to convert the value that the user enters in this text box here. So let's do this. For drop-down lists, you need to use a so-called combo box. So in one of these lines, go ahead and import Q combo box. And then let's go down here. So we said that we want to add the first combo box on top of the other widgets. And currently the first widget is a QLine edit widget, so the input text box. Therefore, I'm going to have some space here and add, you can say, in combo for the input currency. And then we're going to have the target combo. So that is equal to Q combo box, which doesn't get any arguments, but then you should mention in combo and then add items to that drop-down list, because currently it has no items if you just leave it like that. So using the add items method, you can provide a list of strings, or you could write the list beforehand. So write it in between here, let's say currencies. You'll have a list of, let's say, USD and Euro and INR for Indian rupees. And you can add more currency codes here, as many as you want, or to be more accurate, as many as this X rates PyQt6.com website supports. So you can go there to the website and see how many currencies it supports, and then you can add them in your list in here. So then once you define your list, you say in combo add items, and then you mention the list here, currencies, that one. So we have created our combo box, but we want to add it now to the layout by mentioning the layout and then add widget, and then you say in combo. We can do the same by duplicating these lines down here. So we have the same here now, but I want to change that to target combo, and the list stays the same. Actually, I'm going to delete this, cut out that list declaration because we have it in here already. So in target combo, we add that list again. We're going to have the same currencies both in the input combo and in the target combo. And finally, we need to add that target combo to the layout. Now, I'm going to run this code and hopefully, yeah, we see the two drop-down lists in here. So both of them have the same items. However, now the next step is to see how we can get the current selection, the current user selection in each of the drop-down lists, so that we can get that string, for example, INR and euro for this other one, and then we can send those two strings to this function here, so that the first string goes in this place here and the next string goes in here. So let's see how we can do that. Currently our function is a bit rigid in the sense that it's using these static strings as default values. So we want to delete those default values for the arguments of the getCurrency function, and then we go here in the showCurrency function definition. Here is where we call that function, that getCurrency function. So we get the rate. The getCurrency function is responsible to scrape the current rate between those two given currencies. And then we get that rate in here, we save it in this variable by calling that function. But now that we remove the default values from these arguments, we need to provide those values in here. So that means we need to get access to the selections, to the drop-down list selections from the showCurrency function. To do that, we can write a variable such as in for input currency is equal to in combo dot current text. So this is a method that returns the current selection of the drop-down list. So that current selection is going to be stored in this variable. And we do the same for target currency, which is equal to target combo.current text. So before we do anything further, let's check if we got those two values correctly, in cur and target cur. So we expect to see a print in the terminal when the button is pressed. So showCurrency is called when the button is clicked. So let's run the code and change the second selection to euro, write a number here, press convert, and let's see the terminal. So we have an error in line 22, which is in here. So in getCurrency we have an error, but the print function is before that error. So let's see what the print function returns. So USD euro, that means it's working. We have access to these two values, so USD and euros, the selection in the drop-down list. Now we can provide in cur and target cur as input to this function, to the getCurrency function. So those two values, USD and Euro, will go in here, and then from here, in currency will go to this to construct the URL, and out currency will go to its own place. And then the function will scrape the current rate, and it will return it, and this rate will be equal to the current rate, and then we calculate the output is equal to round input text, which is the number, how many currency units the user wants to convert, and we multiply that by the rate. We round it by 2 so that we don't have many numbers after the decimal point, and then we write the output in the label. And let's run this. USD to euros, 10, convert, and that's the output. If you want to make this output more user-friendly, you can go here to output and create another variable such as message is equal to an f string, and you can say input text, which is the input value of the user, and then you say incur. So let's say the user entered 10, and we say 10 USD is how many in euros? Well, output. And target cur. So 10 USD is 8.8 euro. Let's see if this works. Oh, first we need to provide the message in here. So instead of writing the output, we write the entire message now that we constructed in here. And now we're ready to run this. Go to INR and 3 and convert, and 3 USD is that much INR, so rupees. And that's the final code. So thanks a lot for following, and I'll talk to you later. See you. Hey, welcome back to a new video. This video is more advanced in terms of organizing widgets, because what we had so far is this window here. So the widgets are stacked vertically. But in this video, we will change this to this. So this is what we're going to build. As you see, there's a more advanced layout of the widget. So we have these two widgets stacked vertically, and these two also stacked vertically, and both these two vertical layouts are standing horizontally. So this layout here, and then on the right you have this layout. So this is important if you really want to build applications with PyQt. So let's get started. The current code produces, as I told you, this current app. So just that you know, we built this previously. So now I'm going to add on top of this code. But before we write any code, you definitely first want to make a layout, how you want your app to look like. So I'll suggest you take a pen and a paper and draw together with me. Now this drawing, this sketch was not necessary before because all we had was just some widgets stacked vertically. But now you have to give some more thought to the layout. So you really need to draw something on a paper or on your tablet, on your digital app, if you prefer. So I'm going to switch now to my drawing app and design our GUI interface. I apologize for my drawing, but so this is the main window. And so what we want to have is a drop-down list in here, and a drop-down list somewhere in here. And then we have the input box in here, and then the button somewhere in here. And then we're going to have the labels of the output showing somewhere in here. So that's a drop-down list, and that is also a drop-down list. This is the input box, and this is the button. And that would be the label. Now here's what we do. We will use a hierarchy of layouts. So we saw previously that we created a layout in here using QV box layout, and then we added the combo widget, so the drop-down list, to that layout. Then we added the other drop-down list widget to that layout. We did the same for the input text box and for the label and for the button. So that was one single layout, and that was a vertical layout, meaning that as we added widgets, the widgets were stacked vertically. Now we go back to our interface and we think of what layout we will have. So again, the first layout that we will have will be one big layout object. So let's call that the main layout. Then this main layout is going to have inside another layout, which is this one in here. So let's branch this to layout 1. And so the main layout will have this layout 1, and it will also have the label here. So the label doesn't need to be inside the layout, so we're going to have the label as a standalone widget. Since this is just one widget, it doesn't need to be inside the layout. And then this blue layout here is going to contain two other layouts. This one in here, which will contain these two drop-down lists, and also this other one. So layout 1 will be branched into layout 2 and layout 3. And obviously layout 2, which is this one in here, will have two drop-down lists or combo boxes. So let's say combo 1 and combo 2. And layout 3 will have also two widgets, which is the input widget or a QLine edit widget, whatever you like to name it, and then the button. So that's it. So with that, we have included all our widgets in a hierarchy, in a clear hierarchy, and we're now ready to go back to our code and convert this layout into Python lines. And before we go back to our IDE to program this design into Python code, we first want to specify what type of layout each of these are. So is it a vertical layout or a horizontal layout? So let's look at main layout. As you see, this layout is made of this blue layout and the label. So the blue layout is on top of the label. So we're looking at a vertical layout. So I'm going to write here a V. So that is a vertical layout because its children are stacked vertically. And then we look at layout 1. Layout 1 is this blue, and it has this layout here and this other layout. So these two layouts are stacked horizontally. So layout 2 and layout 3 are stacked horizontally. So this will be a horizontal layout. I'm going to place an H here. And then we have layout 2, which is this here. And so the widgets are stacked vertically. And the same stands for layout 3. So this is a vertical layout, and this is a vertical layout as well. And that's it. Now we're ready to go back to our IDE and start coding. So to convert this design into Python code, I'm going to resize this window so that I see both my programming area and the design. So that's the current code, and we go down here where we define the app, instance, the window that contains all the widgets, the layout, which is a vertical layout. So main layout is a vertical layout. That's the main layout. So QV stands for a vertical layout, so that's fine. But then what does the vertical layout contain? Well, it contains a horizontal layout and a label. So what I'll do here is I will create layout 1. So I can use the same names here that I wrote in the design as variable names in the code. So layout 1 is equal to QH box layout, which needs to be imported now. So let's import it in here. QH box layout, which stands for a horizontal layout. So Q. And once you create that layout, then you want to add that layout to the main layout, which is the variable layout. So layout.add layout, this is the method that is used to add one layout on top of another. So layout 1 will be the child of layout. So that was the first step, and then we have the label. So under this now I'm going to add the label. The label is currently somewhere in here. So those are the two lines that create and add the label widgets to the main layout. I'm going to cut those and paste them under here. So layout 1, output label is that, and then we add the output label to the main layout. Yes, so the label is part of the main layout. So that's fine. Then we go deeper into our hierarchy, and we have layout 2. So let's create layout 2 is equal to Q. That's a vertical layout. So we're going to use QV box layout for that. Don't forget the parenthesis, and then don't forget to add it to layout 1. So layout 2 is part of layout 1. So layout 1.add layout, and then layout 2 there, right? And then the same we do for layout 3. So I'm going to copy those two lines, paste them here, change layout 2 to layout 3, and here as well to layout 3. So layout 3 is added to layout 1, and it's a vertical layout. So we have those two layouts. What else? Well, we have to go deeper into the hierarchy, and we have combo 1 and combo 2. So that would be the combo 1. I'm not going to change the name. That's fine in combo. But then you have to be careful here. In combo has to be added to layout 2. You see, combo 1 is added to layout 2, and so is target combo here. So target combo is that we add items to the target combo, and then we add it to layout 2. Add widget target combo. Yes. So be careful here. When we add widgets to a layout, we use the add widget method. When we add a layout to a layout, we use the add layout method. So now we're adding a widget here and a widget in here. What else? Well, we have in layout 3, we have to add the input box and the button. So qline edit is what I mean by input box. And we add it to layout 3, and the button as well, we add it to layout 3 also. So then we have window set layout. We set the main layout, which is referenced by the layouts variable. So the main layout is added to the layout, and the other layouts are added to that main layout, and then we have a nice hierarchy. So let's run the code. Yeah, that's the output. Let's try a number here and convert it, and we get the output correctly. So if we change it to another currency, you get that output in Indian rupees. So now if you want to change this button to take it a bit down because it's a bit too high, so you want to align it with this button here, then what you can do is when you add that button widget which is down here. So when you add that widget to layout 3 using the add widget method, you can define an alignment argument and set it to qt dot. Now qt is something that needs to be imported, so go to the imports and say from pyqt core import qt. Now qt gives you access to a set of properties such as alignment flag, and then from alignment flag you access another property which is align bottom. So with that you specify that the buttons should be aligned to the bottom of its layout. So if you run this again, you see that the bottom now is further down, so it's looking better. And that's the final code. Next, we will go more advanced with PyQt and create an app which destroys files. So it deletes them permanently from a computer so that these files cannot be recovered. And for that app, we're going to use a file dialog feature to browse to the files of the computer and then interact with those files. So it's quite a lot of interesting stuff. Therefore, stay tuned and I'll talk to you in the next video. See you. Hi, welcome back. In this video, we will program a file destroyer. So that's an app which is useful if you have sensitive files in your computer which you really want to permanently delete. And it's not simply about deleting, but it's about destroying them by overwriting them. Now, if you follow the course, we did have a lecture where we wrote a script without a graphical user interface, so just a script which runs on the command line. So this script, what it did is you specified a folder in that script. For example, destination is a folder in here which may contain some files, and so the script then iterates over that path object. So for path in that directory, it filters all the CSV files and then it opens each of that path, file path, and then it overrides an empty byte string into that file. So basically each file will be overwritten with some empty content, and that makes the file hard to recover if somebody else gets your computer and they try to recover your hard disk previous content. Because the file will be overwritten by Python. And then finally we delete that overwritten file. So first we overwrite it and then we delete it. This is the script that does this, but now we want to take this one step further and build a graphical user interface. So this is what we will build in this video, and it has this description here. Select the files you want to destroy, and it warns the user that the files will be permanently deleted. And then it has these two buttons, open files, which shows you a file dialog. So here you can select multiple files that you want to delete. For example, these three, open them, and the program, the GUI, will display the paths of those files in here. And then you can say destroy files, and this destruction successful string shows up in here, and the files will disappear from that folder. So they will be overwritten by Python and then deleted. So let's write this program. We will use PyQt6, so if you haven't installed it, please do so with PyQt6 pip install PyQt6. And then I'm going to use this code. So we did write this code previously, and this creates an application instance. It creates a window instance as well, which is where all the widgets will be added, the buttons, the labels, the text, whatever you add to your main window of your GUI. So we set a title for the window. We also need a layout, which is equal to qv box layout, and you need to import that in here, qv box layout. So we set then that layout and use parentheses here as well. And then we set that layout as the main layout of the window. We show the window and then we execute the app instance so that it generates our application. So currently this is how our window looks like. It has this title and we're ready to add widgets now. So we said that first we're gonna have here on top a label. So let's add a label. For that we need QLabel, the QLabel widget. Let's say description is equal to QLabel, and then we add some info here, which goes inside quotes, so it's a string. I'm using single quotes here, and I'm going to paste the string which I wrote previously. So what this is select the files you want to destroy. I'm telling the user what the app is about and how they can use it, and then the files will be permanently deleted, and permanently is in red font, so you can use these HTML tags as you see in here. So red is in double quotes. That's why I use single quotes for this, since I was using double quotes inside the string. Once you have created the label object, then you want to add the label to layout. So layout.add widget and description is the label, and let's see what we have. Yeah, so that's the label and permanently is in red color. So as we develop this program, I'm going to introduce you to advanced concepts of PyQt, such as this styling of text in here. And we have more and more concepts to discover in this video. So let's add more widgets. What's next? Well, it has to be a button. So let's say openBTN is equal to Q. Well, we need to import the button. So let's not have that line infinitely long and have another import statement here from PyQt6.qt widgets import Q push button. Q push button goes there, and the title of the button will be open files. Add that button to layout using add widget. Open button. Test it. Yeah, it's there. Now, if you want to add a tooltip option feature to this button, you can do so. Because currently, as you see, when I hover the mouse over the button, I don't see any info popping up. So if you want to have that, then you want to refer to the variable associated to your button object and then say set tooltip. And you can use the same string, open files, and run. So if I hover the mouse button here, you see this small prompt open file. This could be useful especially when you have icons instead of buttons with text. So icons don't have labels, and it becomes very crucial to have these pop-ups so that the user can see what these icons are about. However, this is not an icon, it's just a button with plain text, so perhaps this is not necessary in this case, but it's just there so that you know that this exists. And do you want to make the button maybe smaller? Well, you can do that by referring again to the button and then use set fixed width. So with that, let's say 60 and run. So it's too small, perhaps 100. So this, run. Now it looks better, so try to experiment with other sizes. And let's also align the button to be at the center of the window. For that, you can use alignment equal to, so alignment inside the add widget method. that will be equal to qt.alignment. And qt is something that needs to be imported from PyQt6.qt core import qt. So alignment flag and dot align center property. Run, and the button is at the center now. Right, so what does this button do? Let's connect it to a slot, which will be a function that we will write on top here. So to connect the button, you should refer to the button. So we're talking about doing something when the button is clicked. So open button.clicked, then we connect it to a function. So when the button is clicked, this function now will be called. Let's name this function open files and then define that function open files in here. And so what should the app do when we press the open files button? When the user presses that button, well, the app should open a dialog box that allows the user to select files on their file system, on their operating system. So for that, we need something called QFile dialog, and you need to import that in here and then create that object instance. So for that, I'm going to say file names and just an underscore. So we have two variables here, and these two variables are equal to QFileDialog. I'm having two variables because this returns two objects. The first object is a list of file names. So if the user selects 3 files, then a list will be generated containing the absolute paths of all those files, of each of those files. And then we have this, which is some extra information about the dialog action, which we don't need. So we just leave it as an underscore, which is just a variable, but it's just a throwaway variable. So QFileDialog, actually we need to call the get open file names of that class. The first argument will be the window. The window is the variable that contains the QWidget object. And then you want to specify a label for the dialog window. Let's say select files. And that's it. Now, just to show you what file names is, I'm going to print it out on the terminal. And then I'll select some files now through the GUI. But first, make sure you have some sample files that you want to destroy. So open your file explorer, perhaps put some sample files which you don't need there. So I'm putting one here, one file, and I'm going to just duplicate it, copy and paste it. Control V, make several copies. So you have some files to play around with. And then run the code and open files. The dialog will appear. Go to the folder where you have those files, those sample files, and select a couple of them. Open. And now, when you press the open button on the terminal, I got a list printed out. So the list has 3 items, and each item is the absolute path to each of those files that we selected in the dialog box. So that gives us now the possibility to manipulate and delete those files. So for that, I'm going to write here a loop for file name in file names. And I prefer to use the path library. So from path lib, it's a standard library, you don't need to install it. Import path. So I'm going to convert each file name into a path object. A path is a specialized object in Python which makes dealing with files more efficient. So path is equal to path, that class, and then we provide file name here, that file name, which in the first loop will be that first string. So file name is just a string, and file name goes inside path and it becomes a path object now, not a string. So and then we say with open path, that current path object, we open it as a write binary and we say as file. So file now is an open file in Python. It's a specific file object. So we have a string in file name, we have a path object in path, and we have a file object in file. And this file we can write a byte string. So the file is open now and we can modify it with Python. So what we do is write a byte string there, and that will overwrite whatever content the file has inside. So that's like modifying the file and the previous content is just lost. So that's a very safe deletion of your sensitive files. So with that, you write the file, so you modify it. Then if you want to delete the overwritten file, you can do so by using, first you have to unindent, so the file will be saved on disk at that point, and then if you want you can say path.unlink to delete the file. The unlink method will delete that path, so the file associated with that path object. So let me try to run the code. And then click on Open Files, go to the Files directory where I have these files. I'm selecting A2, 3, and 4 and press on Open. So with that, if I go to this directory now, I see that files 2, 3, and 4 are gone. So they are overwritten and then deleted. But this is not the best user interface because I think we're missing a button here. So if you run the program again, the best user experience is that the user first should open the files, so they select the files they want to delete, and then here should be another button that should say something like destroy the files, and that button should execute this part of the code, not the open files button. So what we need is another button under the open button. So let's say destroy button btn is equal to q push button, and let's name this destroy files. Let's set a width for that as well and put it at the center here, and then finally make sure you change these from open button to destroy button, and also here destroy button, and then finally you refer to destroy button to clicked to connect, and we want to connect that to another function. Let's say destroy files. This is a new function we need to write somewhere in here. Define destroy files. And then this code is transferred to this function, so that this code executes when the user presses that destroy button. But we have a problem here. File names is a variable defined inside this function, and that makes that variable local. So it only has a scope inside this function. It will not be recognized outside of that function unless we declare that as a global variable. Now, using global, so making variable global in Python is not the best practice, and this could cause some issues later on when you expand your program, unless you are very careful with what you're doing, and you can avoid those problems. But The best practice to avoid using global variables is to use object-oriented programming. So to structure your programs using classes. And you can do that with PyQt. So you can use classes and you can write the same program using classes and avoid using globals. Because inside that class, you can use instance variables instead of global variables, and that would solve the issue with not having to use global variables. So that's something you should know about using global. With that in mind, let's keep our current structure without going to object-oriented programming. So this will do the job just fine. So by doing global file names, that means file names can be accessed now from other parts of the code and not only from inside this function. Yeah, so let's try to run the code again. Run main. Now we have this button here. So first we want to open files. Let's select 5 and 6. Open. Press on destroy and check if files are still there or not. Yeah, so they are destroyed, 5 and 6. We can do more by adding a label under the last button here so that we let the user know what's going on. So what I'll do is I'll go down here and add a message variable which is equal to QLabel. Currently this will be empty, and I'll add this to the layout, so layout.addWidget message. And then in here, once the user opens the file, instead of printing out the file names on the terminal, I want to print them out on that label. So message.set text, and then you want to enter file names, not file names, because file names is currently, it's a list which looks something like that, A, B, and C, and so on. So a list cannot be accepted by the setText method. So what we want to do instead is we want to say join, so a string.join file names. And what do we want to join them with? You can say a dash, for example, and you'll get something like that, A-B. Or you can do better and say backslash, which creates a break line. Well, here on the terminal, it doesn't look like a break line, but if you print it out on a label widget or use a print function here, then you will see that, it will be a break line, so \n. Now you see that A is one line, and then we have the break line which connects the two. So \n is converted into a break line when you use a print function or when you print it out on a label. So that means we should say \n dot join, so join all the elements of file names using that separator. And then in here we exit the loop, so in this place in here, in the same indentation label with the for loop, and then say message dot set text destruction successful, and run. So open files and select a few files, 7, 8, 9, using the shift. And so these are the files that were selected. And you press on destroy files and you have that label destruction successful. You can put the label more on the center by using alignment is equal to qt.alignment flag.align center, and that should solve the issue. So open files, and now the label is at the center. So that concludes this video. Thanks a lot for following, and see you in the next videos.